Amelia Rhodes tightened her scarf around her neck as she stepped onto the jet bridge of Flight 227, glancing briefly at the steel wings glinting in the early morning sun. She carried only a small leather satchel and a laptop bag, essentials for her short trip from Seattle to Washington, D.C., for the Defense Technology Conference she'd been preparing for months. The airport buzzed with the usual chaos. Rolling suitcases, hurried travelers, the occasional family hugging goodbye. Yet amidst the noise, Amelia felt a strange serenity. Flying had always calmed her. There was something about the rhythm of engines, the hum of pressurized cabins, and the endless sky that reminded her of possibilities, not danger. She made her way down the aisle, nodding politely at the other passengers. Some were already settling in, some struggling to stuff oversized carry-ons into the overhead bins. She chose seat 15F, a window seat in the middle of the fuselage, not too close to the wing, but high enough to catch a good view of the clouds. She placed her satchel under the seat, slid her laptop onto her lap briefly, and tucked it away. It was a routine she had perfected. Find the right seat, buckle in, take a sip of coffee, and let her thoughts drift into the cloudscape below. Today, however, something felt different. Amelia traced her fingers along the armrest, a small habit she had when thinking. The engines roared to life, and the vibration tickled through the soles of her shoes. Flight attendants moved briskly down the aisle, demonstrating the emergency procedures with practiced smiles. Amelia followed along, though her thoughts drifted elsewhere. She remembered the countless simulations she had run in her years as an aerospace systems engineer. Every panel, every button, every circuit in the cockpit told a story she had helped shape. The training had never been about controlling a plane. It had been about anticipating failure, understanding how humans and machines interacted under extreme conditions. Most passengers never noticed the intricacies behind the metal and glass. They trusted to carry them through the sky. Amelia had spent her career noticing them. The hum of the engines shifted slightly as the plane taxied to the runway. The captain's voice, warm and professional, welcomed passengers aboard, mentioning weather conditions and estimated flight time. Amelia appreciated the tone. She could tell he had a steady hand. But still, a small knot of unease twisted in her stomach. It was subtle, barely noticeable. A slight lag in the cabin's pressurization, a faint irregularity in the engine pitch. She couldn't name it, but experience whispered a warning she hadn't felt in years. As Flight 227 lifted into the sky, the city below shrank rapidly. Amelia pressed her forehead gently against the cool window, watching a patchwork of streets, rivers, and parks dissolve into a misty haze of clouds. The world looked peaceful from above, calm and serene, deceptively so. She sipped her coffee and allowed herself to exhale, thinking about the conference ahead, her presentation on advanced communication systems, her colleagues' anticipation, the subtle politics of the defense industry, the excitement of professional achievement mingled with the comfort of routine. This was supposed to be an ordinary flight, just another business trip. The cabin settled into its rhythm. Engines hummed steadily. Flight attendants moved quietly between rows. Passengers read, dozed, or tapped on devices. Amelia opened her laptop briefly, checking messages, then closed it, letting the quiet lull her into reflection. She thought about her family, her younger brother who had just graduated from college, the friends she rarely saw outside of work conferences. For a moment, she allowed herself a small smile, remembering the laughter in her parents' kitchen, the smell of coffee brewing on a Sunday morning. The ordinary moments of life often seemed unremarkable until they became precious memories. Then, almost imperceptibly, the hum of the plane shifted again. It was a subtle note, something most passengers would never notice, easily dismissed as turbulence or a mechanical quirk. Amelia's eyes narrowed. Years of experience had trained her to sense anomalies, to detect patterns and deviations before they became problems. She noticed the slight tremor in the cabin floor, the faint echo of the engines that didn't match the usual cadence, the way the temperature gauge flickered momentarily on her personal display. She straightened in her seat, suddenly alert, a chill brushing down her spine. Amelia glanced at the flight attendants. They moved with practiced efficiency, yet there was a tension in their shoulders, a sharpness in their eyes that betrayed a hint of unease. She didn't speak immediately. There was no need. Her mind worked faster than words, calculating possibilities. Engine malfunction? Cabin depressurization? Communication failure? Each scenario played out in her head like a simulation, probabilities calculated in seconds. She allowed herself to assess without panicking, relying on the discipline that had guided her through years of high-pressure work. For the first time, the silence of the cabin felt heavy. Passengers whispered to each other, unaware of the subtle signals Amelia had already noticed. She watched a man near the wing glance nervously at the flight display. A young woman grip her armrest with white knuckles. A child pressed his forehead against the window, fascinated and oblivious. The world beyond the glass seemed impossibly still. Amelia's mind wandered briefly to the physics she loved, the interplay of air pressure, lift, and thrust, all of which could betray the unwary if something went wrong. She shifted in her seat, instinctively checking the layout of the cabin, noting the nearest exits, the locations of oxygen masks, and the flight attendants' positions. As the plane ascended further into the clouds, Amelia felt the first real pang of fear, not a panic born of imagination, but a recognition that ordinary flights, like ordinary lives, could pivot in an instant. She could not yet see the crisis, but she could feel the currents of possibility swirling in the air. The knot in her stomach tightened, and she realized that her role as a passenger, as an observer, was about to change. The ordinary flight she had envisioned was no longer a certainty. Something awaited her high above the Rockies, something that would call on every ounce of her skill, courage, and composure. She took a deep breath, pressing her hand against the window, grounding herself. Amelia Rhodes, passenger in seat 15F, smiled faintly at the irony. She had flown thousands of times, designed systems that would guide aircraft like this one. Yet here she was, powerless in appearance, entirely reliant on chance and circumstance. And yet, the thought didn't frighten her. It galvanized her. She was ready to act, ready to notice what others would miss. Somewhere in the clouds ahead, Flight 227's fate awaited, and she would not be merely a passenger. As the hum of the engines deepened, and the landscape below disappeared into a tapestry of mist and cloud, Amelia settled in, alert, observant, and quietly determined. The ordinary flight had begun, but ordinary, she now knew, was a fragile illusion. And in that fragile space between routine and chaos, the story of Flight 227, Seat 15F, and the passenger who would become its voice, began. The hum of Flight 227, once comforting, began to feel alien. Amelia Rhodes had been watching the subtle shifts in engine tone and cabin pressure, but now something unmistakable rippled through the fuselage. Silence where there should have been sound. The captain's voice, steady and reassuring just moments ago, had vanished from the intercom. The co-pilot, too, had said nothing for several long seconds. Passengers exchanged puzzled glances. Phones buzzed, passengers tapped screens, but no signal. The plane seemed to float in a vacuum, disconnected from the world it had left behind. Amelia's instincts screamed something was very wrong. At the Denver Air Traffic Control Center, alarms blinked red as Flight 227's transponder signal began flickering erratically. Controllers' fingers flew across keyboards, scanning data, initiating standard emergency protocols. Contact the aircraft on all emergency frequencies, one controller ordered, voice calm, but tight. Every channel remained silent. The plane had vanished from radar, leaving nothing but a ghostly echo of its last known altitude and heading. The air traffic control officers exchanged worried glances. In all their years, they had rarely encountered a full loss of both transponder and communication. The clock was ticking, and Flight 227 was in limbo high above the Rocky Mountains. Within the cabin, confusion and unease grew like wildfire. Passengers murmured nervously, clutching armrests or gripping hands. Flight attendants moved carefully through the aisles, offering reassurance, but their eyes betrayed tension. Amelia's mind raced. She had trained to analyze anomalies like this, not to panic in them. The irregular engine tone, the subtle drop in cabin pressure, the sudden disappearance from radar, these were clues, breadcrumbs to a puzzle whose answer was critical to survival. She could feel the plane's vibrations underfoot, every subtle shift and tremor alerting her to the possibilities: mechanical failure, pressurization issues, or a more severe electrical malfunction. She rose from her seat, moving deliberately toward the flight attendants stationed near the front of the cabin. "I need to see the cockpit access panel," she said quietly, yet firmly. The lead attendant hesitated, her knuckles white on the railing, then nodded. Amelia crouched to inspect the small emergency panel, quickly noting the auxiliary circuits and backup power switches. Years of hands-on experience allowed her to identify the functions of systems most passengers would never notice. This wasn't just curiosity, it was survival. "There's a backup comms channel," she explained, voice calm. "I can try to reach someone if you let me." The attendant glanced at her skeptically. "Are you trained for that?" she asked. Amelia met her eyes evenly. "I've worked with flight comm systems for years. I can do this." Reluctantly, the attendant moved aside, and Amelia accessed the terminal hidden in the galley, flipping switches and routing auxiliary power. Her fingers worked quickly but methodically, a symphony of precision born from years of practice. A faint crackle of static filled the cabin. Amelia leaned closer, pressing the emergency mic button. "This is passenger Amelia Rhodes on Flight 227, she began, her voice calm but resolute. "We've lost cockpit communication. Does anyone read?" Miles away, at NORAD headquarters, a flurry of activity erupted as the transmission pinged on the radar screens. Operators froze, staring at the text overlay and the faint crackling voice. "We've got a civilian on comms," one officer muttered, disbelief in his voice. "Is she reporting the status of a plane at 36,000 feet? The message repeated, each word carrying the weight of urgency. Someone was alive in the cockpit's absence, capable of bridging the gap between chaos and rescue. Meanwhile, the cabin's atmosphere shifted. Passengers leaned closer, some craning their necks, trying to catch the words. Flight attendants exchanged a glance of astonishment. Amelia continued, methodically reporting what she had observed. Irregular engine hum, minor cabin depressurization, and the lack of cockpit communication. Her calm tone contrasted with the passengers' growing anxiety. They began to realize that this was no ordinary disruption. Their fate now rested in the hands of the woman in 15F, at a nearby airbase in Colorado Springs. 2 F-22 Raptors roared off the tarmac, afterburners screaming, tearing through the sky toward the coordinates of Flight 227. Pilots, Falcon 1 and Ghost 2 adjusted flight paths, scanning their instruments as they closed the distance. The civilian airliner appeared as a silver streak below them, small but significant against the vast expanse of clouds and mountains. Their mission was simple in theory: intercept, assess, and guide. But the radio silence from the cockpit complicated everything. There was no way of knowing what had happened inside the fuselage, what mechanical or human factors threatened the aircraft. The F-22s approached in formation, observing the airliner through high-tech sensors. Falcon 1's eyes darted between the display and the plane below. "She's not responding on any channel," he said, voice low. Ghost 2, scanning the wings and fuselage, added, "No signs of fire or structural damage yet." But no comms is never good. They recognized immediately that time was critical. At this altitude, even minor malfunctions could escalate rapidly. A lapse in oxygen, cabin pressure, or navigation could turn the airliner into a ticking trap. Back in the cabin, Amelia's strategy was meticulous. She guided a flight attendant to reset the auxiliary systems while keeping passengers calm. "We're going to be okay," she said, not as reassurance, but as a directive. Her voice carried authority, a calm tether in a growing storm of uncertainty. The hum of engines fluctuated again, and she noticed a slight drop in oxygen levels. Her mind ran through emergency procedures: cabin depressurization, manual override, emergency descent, calculating the safest course of action before the danger escalated. Static crackled through the newly accessed emergency frequency. Amelia held the mic steadily, listening intently. Finally, a voice broke through, faint, distant, but unmistakable. "Flight 227. This is NORAD. Do you copy?" Relief coursed through her veins, but she remained composed. "This is Echo," she said, using a name she remembered from her old Air Force contract. "We've lost cockpit communication. The crew is unresponsive, and cabin pressure is dropping. Please advise." The pilots on the other end, Falcon 1 and Ghost 2, exchanged stunned glances. "Echo?" Falcon 1 murmured. "Project Horizon engineer? She's the reason we can even hear this." The race against time had begun. The F-22 pilots adjusted their formation, preparing to guide Flight 227 visually while assessing possible interventions. Amelia relayed crucial readings: airspeed, altitude, oxygen levels, and observed system anomalies. She coached the flight attendants through manual checks, keeping her tone calm and precise. Every second counted, every word a lifeline. Passengers, once anxious and frightened, began to sense a fragile hope, a tether to survival through the composure of the woman in 15F. And above the Rocky Mountains, Flight 227 hung in limbo, an ordinary flight transformed into a battle against uncertainty. Human ingenuity pitted against circumstance. Amelia Rhodes, passenger in seat 15F, was no longer passive. She was a bridge between despair and hope, between the pilots above and the passengers around her. The ordinary flight had ended. The real story, one of courage, skill, and quiet heroism, was only beginning. The cabin of Flight 227 felt surreal. Passengers, once immersed in phones and magazines, now sat frozen, whispers weaving through the rows like nervous currents. The flight attendants moved with cautious efficiency, checking on passengers, their professional composure barely masking the panic they felt. Amelia Rhodes remained in her seat a moment longer, observing, calculating, and formulating her next steps. She had trained for scenarios like this, though never quite like this, stranded thousands of feet above the Rocky Mountains, with communication to the outside world nearly severed. Yet, for the first time in years, she felt the strange, intoxicating clarity of true responsibility. Amelia rose carefully, smoothing her skirt and gripping the back of her seat as she walked toward the galley. Each step was deliberate, measured. She couldn't afford to trip or show fear. "I need access to the cockpit panel," she said, voice steady but commanding. The lead flight attendant, a woman with streaks of gray in her hair and eyes sharp with experience, hesitated. You're not crew," she said, almost a question. Amalia looked her directly in the eye. "I'm not, but I know what to do. Please, let me help." The tension in the attendant's shoulders eased slightly, replaced by a flicker of hope, and she nodded. Amelia crouched before the emergency access panel, fingers dancing over switches, wires, and circuits she had once designed in simulations. Years of experience guided her hands. She recognized the layout instantly, noting minor irregularities and anomalies that most passengers wouldn't even notice. A faint static hiss filled the cabin as she flipped the switches and rerouted auxiliary power to the backup communication system. The air smelled faintly of metal and ozone, a reminder that technology, no matter how advanced, remained fragile. Nearby passengers craned their necks, curious about the woman who seemed to command attention without raising her voice. Amelia didn't acknowledge them. She pressed the emergency mic button and spoke into the receiver, each word deliberate, each pause measured. "This is passenger Amelia Rhodes on Flight 227. We've lost cockpit communication. Does anyone read?" Her voice cut through the faint hum of engines and murmuring passengers, a beacon of control in chaos. On the other end, far above the continental United States, Falcon 1 and Ghost 2, the two F-22 pilots, adjusted formation. Did we just hear a civilian on comms?" Ghost 2 muttered, disbelief mingling with awe. Falcon 1's eyes widened as he scanned the instrument panel, recognizing the voice. "That's Echo, Project Horizon engineer. She's the reason our comms even work. She's bridging the gap for us." The pilots exchanged a stunned glance. In that instant, Amelia was no longer just a passenger. She had become a lifeline, the crucial link between Flight 227 and the outside world. Inside the cabin, Amelia directed the flight attendants with precision. "Check oxygen levels for all passengers. Reset the auxiliary systems if you can. Keep everyone calm and quiet." Her voice carried authority, even as a flicker of fear ignited in her own chest. She couldn't let it show. Calm had a ripple effect. If she faltered, panic could cascade through the cabin, making a precarious situation far worse. The crew followed her instructions, their actions guided by a confidence they had never seen in a civilian. Amelia scanned the cockpit door, noting the electronic lock and the mechanical override sequence she had memorized years ago. Her mind raced through possibilities. If the captain had lost consciousness, if the first officer was incapacitated, what sequence of actions would allow her to gain at least partial control? The thought of actually touching the controls briefly terrified her, yet she knew she had no other choice. This was no longer a simulation. This was real. And Flight 227 was counting on her. The passengers, sensing the gravity of the moment, fell into a hushed silence. Mothers held their children a little tighter, business travelers clasped hands, and the elderly prayed quietly. Amelia's eyes met theirs occasionally, offering reassurance without words. "We'll get through this," she thought, "because I know what to do." She had spent years in high-pressure environments, designing systems that others relied upon for life and death. Now she had to apply every lesson learned, every skill honed, in real time. The backup communication system crackled again, and Amelia's voice carried further. "No AD. This is Echo. We have partial control over cabin systems. Captain and first officer appear unresponsive. Oxygen levels dropping. Guidance required for descent." The pilots in their Raptors responded almost immediately, coordinating visual instructions while keeping the airliner within safe parameters. Amelia relayed instructions calmly to the attendants, ensuring that each adjustment was precise and accurate. The plane, once drifting helplessly in the clouds, now had a steady guide through her calculations. The minutes stretched long and thin, each one a small eternity. Amelia alternated between monitoring the auxiliary systems, guiding attendants, and observing passengers. Her eyes caught subtle details. A slight tremor in the wings, a flicker in the cabin lighting, the gradual drop in air pressure. Every anomaly was catalogued, every clue assessed, every action calculated to maximize safety. She felt the weight of responsibility settle upon her shoulders. Yet it was not fear that drove her. It was focus, the clarity that comes when one realizes that the stakes could not be higher. Outside, the F-22s flanked the airliner, their sleek silver forms cutting through clouds. Falcon One's voice came over the comms. "Echo, we're here visual. You're guiding this flight perfectly. We need your help to manage the descent." Amelia nodded, even though they couldn't see her, and relayed instructions through the cabin, working in synchrony with the pilots above. The passengers watched in awe, some whispering, "She's a hero," under their breath, though Amelia herself never thought of it that way. She was doing what had to be done. Finally, Amelia directed the flight attendants to prepare for partial descent, explaining how to monitor oxygen, throttle, and altitude using visual cues and emergency instruments. Every word was measured, calm, and precise. The aircraft responded as best as it could, slowly adjusting altitude while maintaining stability. Amelia's heart pounded in her chest, but she did not allow panic to show. She was in control, as much as anyone could be in the sky at 36,000 feet, without a functioning cockpit. By the time the cabin began to stabilize, passengers had regained a small measure of confidence. They looked at Amelia with a mixture of gratitude and astonishment. She returned their gazes briefly, offering a nod, a silent acknowledgement that she understood the stakes, that she shared their fear, and that she would not fail them. Amelia Rhodes, seated in 15F just hours ago as an ordinary passenger, had become the guiding hand, the calm center, and the voice that anchored Flight 227. And yet, even as the plane steadied, Amelia knew this was only the beginning. The cockpit still held uncertainty. The crew was incapacitated. The outside world had been alerted, but the descent was far from complete. Each moment that passed could bring new challenges. Each decision could mean the difference between safety and catastrophe. Amelia's mind raced, calculating, anticipating, preparing for the next steps in a sequence that could save or doom the lives around her. The ordinary flight, which had begun with coffee and quiet reflection, had transformed into a high-stakes crucible. The passengers of Flight 227, the crew, and the pilots above all, looked to one woman in 15F to bridge the impossible, to navigate the chaos, and to turn fear into action. Amelia Rhodes felt the gravity of her role, but refused to be paralyzed by it. She had prepared for moments like this, in theory. Now she would apply it in practice. The woman in 15F was no longer a passenger. She was the linchpin of Flight 227's survival. The cabin of Flight 227 was thick with tension. Every passenger and crew member had become acutely aware of the abnormal hum of the engines, the faint tremor of the wings, and the oppressive silence from the cockpit. Amelia Rhodes crouched at the emergency communications panel, her fingers steady, mind calculating. This was no longer just a technical challenge. It was a human one. Hundreds of lives depended on her calm, her knowledge, and the clarity of her voice cutting through static to reach someone, anyone, beyond the fuselage. She pressed the emergency mic button again, inhaling slowly to steady her nerves. Her voice, now unwavering, carried a weight that was both strange and necessary. "This is passenger Amelia Rhodes, seat 15F, Flight 227. We've lost cockpit communication. Do you read?" The words traveled invisibly through the air, bouncing off satellites and ground stations, until they reached the ears of operators who had never expected to hear a civilian voice guiding a commercial flight. At NORAD headquarters, the crackle of the transmission brought the bustling operations room to an abrupt halt. Operators froze in their chairs, eyes wide, fingers poised mid-keyboard. "We've got a civilian." Reporting Flight 227, muttered one officer, disbelief evident in his tone. Another squinted at the radar screen, double-checking coordinates. She's at 36,000 feet. No cockpit comms. She's actually giving a status report. A silence fell over the room, punctuated only by the faint hum of consoles. The room had shifted from routine monitoring to emergency crisis mode in an instant. Far above, Falcon 1 and Ghost 2, the two F-22 pilots scrambled from the base, their afterburners screaming into the sky. Closing in on Flight 227, sensors scanned the airliner with precise instrumentation, picking up vibrations, wing flex, and minor pressure fluctuations. "Do you copy, Flight 227? Falcon 1 asked over their secure comlink. No response. The silence was absolute, and then a voice emerged from the static. Clear, calm, authoritative. "This is Echo. Flight 227. The crew is unresponsive. Cabin pressure is dropping. Guidance required." Ghost 2 blinked at Falcon 1. Did she just say Echo? The Project Horizon engineer? "She's the reason our comm systems even function properly," he murmured, disbelief and admiration mixing in his voice. Falcon 1 leaned back in his seat slightly, absorbing the gravity. "She's a civilian," he said. "And she's telling us exactly what's happening inside the aircraft. That's remarkable." Up to that point, neither pilot had experienced a scenario where a passenger became the intermediary for a full-scale rescue mission. Now they were relying on her intellect, her observations, and her poise to guide their actions. Back in the cabin, Amelia's voice remained calm as she continued her report. "We have partial control over cabin systems. Oxygen levels dropping gradually. No response from the captain or first officer. Passengers are conscious, but some are panicking. We need instructions for safe descent." The words were met with an immediate flurry of responses from the pilots above. "Echo," Falcon 1 began, "we're in visual range. We'll guide you through the descent. Keep the plane steady and follow our instructions precisely. Wear your eyes and ears from above." Passengers listened intently as Amelia relayed the instructions from the F-22 pilots. The aircraft, once drifting helplessly through the clouds, now had guidance, a fragile but critical tether to safety. Flight attendants moved quickly, adjusting oxygen feeds, assisting passengers, and relaying Amelia's instructions to the cockpit instruments. Every minor adjustment mattered. Amelia monitored airspeed, altitude, and cabin pressure while coordinating with the attendants. Her calculations were precise, drawn from years of hands-on experience with aircraft systems and her familiarity with the very engineering that powered Flight 227. Amelia glanced at the passengers. Fear had not vanished, but a cautious optimism had begun to ripple through the cabin. Mothers held children more firmly, business travelers clutched hands with partners, and the elderly whispered prayers of gratitude. The collective gaze occasionally drifted toward 15F, where Amelia crouched, her fingers manipulating switches and dials that many had never noticed. She offered small nods of reassurance, though her own heart pounded. Each instruction she relayed, each turn of a dial, carried life or death weight. The F-22 pilots, Falcon 1 and Ghost 2, maintained tight formation on either side of Flight 227. Their eyes constantly scanned the fuselage for signs of structural compromise, any anomaly that could escalate into catastrophe. "Echo, we need constant updates on oxygen levels and cockpit status," Falcon 1 instructed. Amelia replied swiftly, giving precise readings. Cabin oxygen at 92%, slight pressure drop in forward compartment, minor electrical fluctuations in auxiliary systems. Her voice remained calm, but every fiber of her body was alert, anticipating the next variable, the next complication. Outside, the mountains stretched below, snow-capped and silent, a deceptive serenity contrasting the crisis in the sky. Amelia focused on the instruments and the faint glow of the emergency lights, noting fluctuations in altitude and engine tone. She guided the flight attendants as they monitored passengers, adjusted the auxiliary systems, and prepared for a controlled descent. Every motion was deliberate, every word measured. Her mind raced faster than the plane's engines, calculating variables and probabilities in real time. She could feel the immense responsibility pressing on her, but she welcomed it. Static crackled through the radio again. Falcon 1's voice broke through. "Echo, we're establishing visual reference for descent. You'll follow our lead. Adjust your flaps as instructed, maintain heading, and report all irregularities immediately." Amelia relayed the instructions to the flight attendants, who executed them with precision under her guidance. The plane responded gradually, descending smoothly under her coordination, its passengers still alive and conscious, buoyed by her calm leadership. In those moments, Amelia became the linchpin of the operation. She was neither captain nor crew, yet her knowledge, composure, and decisiveness had transformed her from an ordinary passenger into the critical connection between Flight 227 and the outside world. Passengers began to whisper her codename among themselves. Echo. It was a name of reassurance, a symbol of calm, a voice that had bridged chaos and order. Even the flight attendants, who had been skeptical at first, began to rely on her guidance implicitly. Minutes stretched like hours. Amelia alternated between monitoring instruments, relaying communications, and observing passengers. She noticed subtle fluctuations in the cabin, temperature changes, minor vibrations in the wings, a faint hum from the engines. Each anomaly was catalogued and addressed in real time. She coordinated with the F-22 pilots, confirming headings, altitudes, and speed, ensuring that Flight 227 remained within a safe flight envelope while descending toward lower altitudes, where oxygen levels were more stable. The passengers, sensing a growing rhythm of control amidst chaos, began to settle. Fear was still present, but it was now tempered with trust. They were aware that a woman in seat 15F, previously just another passenger, was orchestrating their survival. Amelia remained focused, voice calm, tone measured, every action deliberate. She felt a strange bond forming with the pilots above, the flight attendants, and the passengers, a silent network of reliance and trust forged in crisis. Above, Falcon 1 and Ghost 2 adjusted their formation to account for turbulence and wind shear, keeping Flight 227 stable, while Amelia relayed critical instructions. Echo, maintain current altitude for the next 30 seconds, then reduce to 10,000 feet gradually. Falcon 1 instructed. Amelia acknowledged and conveyed the information to the crew. The passengers watched in awe as the plane responded precisely to her guidance. In that moment, she was no longer a passenger. She was the voice that everyone, high above and below, trusted implicitly. The ordinary flight that had begun with coffee and quiet anticipation had now transformed into a high-stakes, coordination effort across hundreds of miles of sky, involving a civilian engineer, commercial crew, passengers, and elite F-22 pilots. Amelia Rhodes had become Echo, the central node in a network of life-saving actions, her calm voice bridging chaos and order, fear and hope, uncertainty and survival. And as the plane descended steadily under her guidance, Amelia realized that the crisis was far from over, but for the first time since takeoff, she could see a path to safety. Every instruction, every calculation, every breath she took was a lifeline. She had become the voice in the sky, the calm in the storm, and the guiding force that would carry Flight 227 through the clouds and toward survival. The cabin of Flight 227 had grown unnaturally quiet. Passengers who had once whispered nervously now leaned closer, straining to hear Amelia's voice as she relayed instructions from the emergency comm system. Flight attendants, previously skeptical, moved with deliberate precision, their actions now guided by her authority. Every command Amelia issued, checking oxygen, monitoring instruments, adjusting auxiliary systems, was a lifeline, a tether to survival. Yet amid the technical coordination, there remained a subtle human question. Who was this passenger guiding them? As the F-22 pilots maintained formation above, Falcon 1's voice crackled through the comms again. Echo, status report. Are you able to maintain stability? Amelia paused, her fingers hovering over the panel. A strange clarity washed over her. She realized that to these elite pilots, she was no longer just Amelia Rhodes, the civilian. She was something else entirely, a trusted operator in the midst of crisis. Without hesitation, she responded, Affirmative, Falcon 1. Flight 227 stable. Minor cabin pressure fluctuations corrected. Passengers and attendants accounted for. Ghost 2, monitoring the airliner from above, adjusted his flight path slightly. Echo, that's precise. You're keeping this aircraft coordinated better than most first officers could under normal conditions, he said. Amelia's cheeks flushed with a mixture of pride and adrenaline. She had trained for high-pressure scenarios, but never like this. Coordinating a full airliner in real time while under the watchful eyes of elite pilots. Every adjustment, every calculation, felt heavier than any she had performed in a simulation or on paper. It was then that Falcon 1 asked the question that would define her in the skies. We need a call sign for communication continuity? Your current voice is precise, but we need something official. What should we call you? Amelia hesitated for a fraction of a second. Memories of her Air Force days surged. Years ago, during a classified aerospace project, she had been assigned a coding name, Echo. It had been intended to signify clarity and feedback, the way sound reflected in controlled environments. The irony wasn't lost on her. This coding name, once a simple identifier, could now become a lifeline. Call me Echo, she replied, her voice steady. The moment she spoke it aloud, the words seemed to resonate through the cabin and the comms linked to the F-22s above. In that instant, Amelia Rhodes ceased to exist as a mere passenger. She was now Echo, the voice connecting the airliner to the pilots, to NORAD, to the network of systems designed to prevent catastrophe. The pilots exchanged astonished glances. Echo, Falcon 1 murmured. That's the engineer from Project Horizon. She's the reason our comms even function under stress. We're actually being guided by her expertise. In the cabin, a subtle change occurred. Flight attendants straightened their posture, passengers leaned forward, and an unspoken sense of trust began to permeate the rows. The word Echo carried authority. It was concise, memorable, and imbued with competence. Amelia felt a surge of responsibility, knowing that this coding name, chosen decades ago for obscure reasons, had become the identity by which the entire operation would now rely. She embraced it fully. There was no room for hesitation. Amelia's hands moved over the controls with renewed precision, guided by her memories of simulations and theoretical training. She relayed critical information to Falcon 1 and Ghost 2, exact airspeed, precise altitude, oxygen levels, and observed anomalies in the cabin systems. The F-22 pilots adjusted formation slightly, maintaining optimal positioning to guide the descent visually, while Echo's calm, authoritative voice orchestrated actions within the cabin. Each word she spoke was measured, deliberate, and imbued with authority. Every instruction carried life or death weight. Passengers, sensing the shift, began to follow her lead unconsciously. Children clutched parents' hands with less panic, Business travelers steadied themselves, and the elderly seemed reassured. Some whispered to each other, "She's incredible. She knows what she's doing." Amelia, however, remained focused entirely on the tasks at hand. The word echo had become more than a call sign. It was a symbol of composure, clarity, and the bridge between chaos and order. Above, Falcon 1 maintained a tight formation, eyes scanning for turbulence and wing flex, while Ghost 2 monitored the plane's electronics and pressure readings. "Echo," Falcon 1 said, "we've got visual confirmation on all external systems. Flight 227 is responding precisely to your instructions. The descent trajectory looks stable, but continue monitoring oxygen and pressure levels closely." Amelia nodded, though they couldn't see her. She relayed every detail to the attendants. "Monitor oxygen flow, check auxiliary systems, ensure passengers remain calm, and be ready for incremental adjustments." The minutes stretched tautly, each second charged with potential danger. Amelia alternated between her technical role and her observational role, noting subtle details in the cabin. A passenger pale and trembling, a child's anxious gaze, a flight attendant whose hands shook slightly. Every human variable mattered. She directed small, precise actions. "Pass this oxygen mask to the woman in row 12, she instructed. "Encourage the child to sit down. Adjust the seatbelt snugly without alarming anyone." Every movement, every word, was calculated to maintain order under pressure. It was during one of these moments that Falcon 1 spoke again, his voice tinged with awe. "Echo, the clarity and calm you're providing, it's extraordinary. You're keeping an entire aircraft under control, better than most trained officers could. We're following your lead." Amelia felt a brief warmth in her chest. She allowed herself a small acknowledgement, but her focus remained unwavering. The stakes were too high for distraction. She was guiding lives through a cloud of uncertainty, and every instruction mattered. The F-22s adjusted their position slightly to account for turbulence, while Echo continued to relay information, monitoring the plane's minor fluctuations in altitude, airspeed, and cabin pressure. Each reading was cross-referenced with her knowledge of Flight 227's design and the systems she had studied extensively. "Cabin pressure stable at 93%, she reported. "Forward compartment fluctuating by 1.2%. No structural anomalies detected. Oxygen distribution nominal. Passengers calm but alert." The pilots above nodded, trusting her observations implicitly. Meanwhile, the codename Echo began to resonate outside the plane. Controllers at NORAD and air traffic monitoring centers shared updates, amazed at the civilian guiding a commercial airliner through such complexity. The news of a single passenger, capable of maintaining life-saving coordination, rippled through the communication networks. To the pilots, the crew, and the passengers, she had become a symbol, a living embodiment of precision, calm, and control. As Flight 227 descended gradually under the coordination of Echo and the F-22 pilots, a bond formed, invisible but undeniable, between the woman in 15F, the crew, the passengers, and the elite pilots above. Each relied on the other, trust and expertise intertwining to form a network of survival. Amelia's hands flew over the panels, her eyes scanning gauges, her mind calculating every variable. She had become more than a passenger. She had become the voice that held the skies steady, the call sign everyone answered, and the beacon of hope that guided Flight 227 through its most perilous moments. And so, the ordinary flight that began with coffee and quiet contemplation had transformed completely. Amelia Rhodes, once a civilian passenger, had become Echo, a name, a voice, and a symbol that connected the earth to the sky, chaos to order, and fear to calm. Every instruction she spoke carried weight. Every movement was deliberate, and every decision shaped the survival of everyone aboard. In the eyes of the passengers, the flight attendants, and the pilots above, she had become a legend in the making. The woman in 15F, whose voice would echo far beyond the clouds. The subtle hum of Flight 227 was now a constant reminder that every second counted. Amelia Rhodes, seated in 15F, crouched over the emergency comms panel, her hands steady but mind-racing. Passengers and crew alike had begun to grasp the gravity of the situation, their eyes silently acknowledging the calm authority she radiated. Yet calm was a fragile veneer. Oxygen levels were slowly dropping. The captain and first officer remained unresponsive, and every minor fluctuation in the cabin's instruments could spiral into catastrophe. Amelia knew she had to act, quickly, decisively, and flawlessly. She turned to the lead flight attendant, a woman named Laura, and spoke with measured urgency. "Laura, we need to access the cockpit manually. There's a backup override system. It's located under the lock panel. You'll need to follow my instructions exactly." The attendant's hands shook slightly as she reached for the panel, but Amelia's steady voice guided her, step by step. Flip the left switch, hold it for 3 seconds, then rotate the lever clockwise. That should disengage the electronic lock. Seconds felt like minutes, each movement critical. While Lavra worked on the panel, Amelia monitored the cabin systems, her eyes darting between the oxygen gauges, engine indicators, and auxiliary systems. Minor fluctuations in pressure were beginning to accelerate, subtle but unmistakable signs of hypoxia setting in for those seated near the front. Amelia quickly instructed attendants to check masks and ensure passengers were breathing properly. Row 12 and 14. Assist your neighbors with oxygen. Ensure no one panics. Calm breathing helps preserve oxygen supply. Her voice, calm yet commanding, resonated through the cabin. Meanwhile, Falcon 1 and Ghost 2 maintained a tight formation above, scanning Flight 227 for anomalies. "Echo, you have partial control of the cabin systems?" Falcon 1 asked over the comms. Amelia responded, "Affirmative. Monitoring oxygen, cabin pressure, and auxiliary power. I'm preparing to access the cockpit manually. We'll need to stabilize immediately after gaining entry." Ghost 2 adjusted his flight path slightly, accounting for wind shear and minor turbulence. The pilot's trust in Echo had solidified. She was now the essential link coordinating a descent thousands of feet above the Rocky Mountains. With precise guidance from Amelia, Lavra completed the manual override sequence. The cockpit door released with a hiss, revealing the slumped bodies of the captain and first officer. Amelia assessed the situation quickly. Both crew members were unconscious but breathing. Hypoxia was the culprit. Oxygen deprivation at high altitude had rendered them incapacitated. Amelia acted without hesitation, instructing Lavra and the other attendants to carefully support the crew, ensuring they remained safe as she focused on the next critical task, stabilizing the aircraft and preparing for descent under the guidance of the F-22 pilots. The passengers watched, wide-eyed and tense, as Amelia coordinated every move. Mothers whispered reassuring words to their children. Business travelers clasped hands in silent solidarity, and the elderly murmured prayers of hope. Yet no one spoke loudly enough to distract Amelia. Her focus was absolute. Every minor adjustment, throttle, auxiliary power, cabin pressure, mattered. Each instruction she relayed to the attendants was calculated, precise, and critical to survival. Falcon 1 spoke through the comms again. "Echo, maintain current altitude while preparing for gradual descent. We'll guide you visually. Ensure stability. Adjust flaps to compensate for turbulence. Monitor engine readings closely." Amelia relayed these instructions to the crew, guiding them through minor adjustments, slight throttle increases, flap modifications, and cabin alignment. The aircraft, previously adrift and vulnerable, now moved with careful precision, each adjustment orchestrated under Echo's watchful guidance. The next challenge emerged subtly, but insidiously. Oxygen levels were continuing to decline, especially in the forward compartments. Amelia's eyes darted between instruments. Auxiliary oxygen to rows 1 to 10. Increase flow slightly. Check masks in rows 11 to 16. Forward cabin pressure fluctuating. Maintain as stable as possible. Flight attendants obeyed immediately, adjusting valves and masks while ensuring passengers remained calm. Amelia's voice remained unwavering, a beacon of composure amidst the growing tension. Minutes stretched into an eternity as she monitored every detail. Falcon 1 adjusted the F-22 formation to provide visual guidance for a safe descent corridor. Echo will take you down gradually. We'll keep the aircraft in a stable envelope. Continue reporting all anomalies. Amelia acknowledged, relaying exact altitudes, cabin pressure readings, and oxygen levels. She coordinated minor throttle adjustments and advised attendants on seating arrangements to optimize balance. Each small action was essential to prevent disaster. Then came the subtle tremor Amelia had anticipated, a slight shift in the fuselage, indicating minor turbulence over a mountain pass. The plane shuddered imperceptibly. Amelia acted immediately. Adjust flaps to 15 degrees. Reduce throttle by 2%. Passengers, stay seated, tighten seatbelts. She monitored the instruments, noting the vibrations diminishing as the aircraft stabilized. The passengers murmured relief. The flight attendants exhaled silently. Every second of composed intervention had prevented what could have escalated into panic or structural compromise. As Flight 227 descended under the guidance of Echo and the visual cues from Falcon 1 and Ghost 2, the magnitude of her role became apparent. She was no longer merely responding to events. She was anticipating them, orchestrating coordinated action across multiple systems, guiding human and machine alike through the complex ballet of survival. Her mind remained alert, yet disciplined, balancing observation, calculation, and execution with surgical precision. The F-22 pilots maintained their vigil, adjusting positions to account for wind shear, turbulence, and the subtle variances in Flight 227's descent. Echo, maintain heading 270. Reduce altitude gradually. Report passenger status, Falcon 1 instructed. Amelia relayed each instruction with clarity, observing passengers and crew, ensuring stability in both human and mechanical systems. Each verbal cue, each minor adjustment, was a lifeline bridging the gap between chaos and order, fear and survival. Hours seemed to compress into minutes as the collaboration unfolded. Amelia guided attendants through manual oxygen checks, monitored pressure gauges, and verified auxiliary systems while relaying every subtle anomaly to the F-22 pilots. The passengers, once paralyzed by fear, began to respond to her calm authority. Children rested in parents' arms, adults steadied themselves, and the cabin atmosphere, though tense, was no longer panicked. Echo had become more than a voice. She had become a stabilizing force. Finally, as the aircraft stabilized at a lower altitude where oxygen levels were safe, Amelia allowed herself a brief moment to acknowledge the enormity of what had been accomplished. She had coordinated a precarious descent, accessed the incapacitated cockpit, managed auxiliary systems, and maintained passenger calm, all while communicating with elite F-22 pilots high above. The ordinary passenger in 15F had become the linchpin of a complex, life-saving operation, a bridge between fear and hope, chaos and survival. And yet, the mission was not complete. Flight 227 remained hundreds of miles from a safe landing, and Amelia's vigilance could not waver. Every second still mattered. Every command, observation, and instruction could tip the balance. But for the first time, a fragile sense of confidence had taken root in the cabin. Echo had proven that calm, knowledge, and precision could prevail even in the most extraordinary circumstances. The race against silence continued, but now, Flight 227 had a fighting chance. The vast expanse of the Rocky Mountains stretched below Flight 227, like a jagged sea of stone and snow, glinting under the fading sunlight. Amelia Rhodes, still crouched in 15F, felt a tight knot of anticipation coil in her stomach. The aircraft had stabilized at a lower altitude, where oxygen levels were safe, but the descent toward a safe landing was fraught with peril. Falcon 1 and Ghost 2 maintained formation above, their sleek F-22s scanning for turbulence, wind shear, and potential hazards along the projected flight path. Amelia's voice now carried the authority of someone who had become both navigator and commander, the critical link between the passengers, crew, and elite pilots. Echo, Falcon 1's voice crackled through the emergency cones. We're guiding you toward the nearest airstrip, capable of handling Flight 227. Prepare for gradual approach. Turbulence may increase over the next few miles. Amelia nodded to herself, though the pilots could not see her. Understood, she replied, steady and measured. She relayed the instructions to the flight attendants, ensuring passengers remained seated, seatbelts fastened, and oxygen masks readily available. The cabin, once filled with quiet tension, now pulsed with a fragile rhythm of organized urgency. The lead flight attendant, Laura, adjusted the auxiliary systems under Amelia's guidance. Echo, we're monitoring forward compartments. Oxygen levels are nominal, cabin stable, she reported. Amelia's eyes darted over the instruments, calculating descent rates and passenger needs. Maintain current heading, reduce throttle gradually. Prepare flaps to 15 degrees at 5,000 feet, she instructed, her mind running simulations in real time. Each adjustment was critical. Too steep a descent could overwhelm the aircraft systems, while too shallow would prevent a safe approach to the airstrip. Passengers sensed the change in pace. Mothers held their children more firmly. Business travelers clasped hands with partners, and the elderly whispered prayers of hope. Amelia offered small nods of reassurance as she worked, her voice a lifeline cutting through the low hum of engines. Her calm authority reassured not just the crew but the passengers, providing structure to a situation that could have easily spiraled into panic. The F-22s adjusted their positions, guiding Flight 227 visually. Falcon 1 instructed, Echo, align with the runway axis. Maintain altitude and heading precisely. We'll handle wind shear readings from above. Amelia relayed the instructions to Laura, who coordinated the auxiliary systems and assisted with minor cabin adjustments. The aircraft responded obediently, a large commercial plane, moving with surprising precision under the guidance of a civilian passenger and 2 elite fighter pilots. Then came the turbulence. Flight 227 shuddered as the plane passed through a pocket of turbulent air descending from the mountains. Oxygen masks rattled lightly, and the faint tremor ran through the cabin. Amelia's hands flew over the instruments, adjusting throttle and flaps to compensate. Maintain seating positions. Reduce cabin activity. Adjust throttle by 2%. Flaps steady at 15 degrees, she instructed. The crew followed her every command with precise obedience, and gradually the turbulence subsided. Amelia's mind ran through scenarios with military precision. She anticipated minor fluctuations in altitude, variations in pressure, and passenger needs. Oxygen check for rows 1 to 12. Ensure all masks are functional. Passengers seated and calm. Monitor engine output. Forward engine slightly above nominal thresholds, she reported. The F-22 pilots above confirmed. Flight 227 stable. Approach corridor clear. Maintain current trajectory. The synchronization of human and mechanical coordination was delicate but effective. Amelia's calm voice acted as the glue holding everything together. As the plane descended further, the runway became faintly visible through the clouds below. The airstrip was small, but capable of handling a commercial aircraft. Amelia's pulse quickened. Every adjustment she made now had immediate consequences. Reduce altitude to 3,000 feet gradually. Keep flaps at 15 degrees. Increase focus on stability. Minor adjustments to throttle as needed, she instructed. The F-22s flanked the airliner, guiding it with visual cues and real-time telemetry. In the cabin, passengers began to sense proximity to the landing. Children's nervous energy mixed with curiosity. Adults whispered reassurances, and some silently counted the seconds. Amelia glanced at their faces and adjusted her tone. "We're almost there. Keep calm." "You're doing great," she said softly. Her words were both instruction and comfort, a tether keeping the cabin unified in focus and patience. The turbulence increased again as the plane approached the final stretch of mountains. Amelia's hands moved instinctively, adjusting throttle, flaps, and auxiliary systems. Steady heading 270. Flaps to 20 degrees at 1,500 feet. Minor throttle adjustments for wind shear, she instructed. Lavra and the attendants responded with precision, assisting passengers and making minor adjustments to the cabin systems. Outside, the F-22S mirrored her guidance, visually signaling alignment and approach cues. Suddenly, a minor alarm chimed from the auxiliary system. Amelia's eyes narrowed as she quickly analyzed the situation. Forward compartment pressure fluctuating. Stabilize manually. Rotate valves 15 degrees clockwise. Monitor for further anomalies, she instructed. The flight attendants followed, adjusting the controls as Amelia guided every step. The small adjustments stabilized the cabin, preventing what could have escalated into a more serious issue at a critical phase of descent. Minutes stretched into a tense eternity. Every breath, every movement, every minor adjustment counted. Amelia coordinated with the F-22 pilots, relaying instrument readings and receiving visual cues to align the plane precisely with the airstrip. Passengers and crew moved in synchronized compliance, following her instructions to minimize stress and optimize stability. The plane, once adrift and vulnerable, now moved like a well-oiled machine under the precise orchestration of a civilian passenger. Finally, the runway emerged clearly through the clouds. Amelia's voice, calm yet commanding, cut through the cabin. Maintain current heading. Steady descent. Flaps to 25 degrees. Throttle gradual. Align with runway axis precisely. The F-22 pilots above confirmed alignment. Every second now carried extraordinary weight. Even the smallest miscalculation could result in disaster. Amelia's fingers hovered over critical switches, her mind anticipating variables, her body tense with concentrated focus. The airstrip drew closer. Amelia coordinated final adjustments. Minor throttle changes, flap adjustments, and cabin stability measures. The F-22s signaled visually, guiding the plane's trajectory with millimeter precision. Echo, runway clear. Maintain alignment. Gradual descent confirmed, Falcon 1 instructed. Amelia relayed every instruction to the attendants and passengers. The cabin, though tense, now moved as a cohesive unit. As Flight 227 touched down, Amelia guided the throttles to reduce speed smoothly, coordinated flap adjustments, and monitored braking systems in coordination with the F-22 pilots. The wheels kissed the runway, the fuselage shuddered, and the hum of engines gradually diminished. The aircraft rolled safely, guided entirely by her precise instructions, supported by the vigilant pilots above and the crew below. A collective sigh swept through the cabin. Mothers hugged children tightly. Passengers whispered gratitude, and the flight attendants exchanged astonished glances. Amelia, still crouched at the comms panel, allowed herself a small smile. Flight 227, once adrift in uncertainty, had touched solid ground safely. The ordinary flight had become an extraordinary story of calm, courage, and precision. Amelia Rhodes, the woman in 15F, had transformed into Echo, a voice in the sky, the linchpin of a complex rescue, and the embodiment of composure under pressure. The passengers, crew, and pilots had relied on her knowledge, decisiveness, and calm authority to navigate the perilous descent. What began as a routine flight had become a testament to human skill, coordination, and courage. And as the aircraft slowed on the runway, with F-22s guiding it visually to taxi safely, Amelia felt a quiet satisfaction. The danger had passed, but the lessons remained vivid. Courage, calm, and expertise could turn despair into hope. Flight 227, its passengers, and the crew had survived, thanks to a single passenger who became the voice in the sky, the call sign Echo. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the tarmac as Flight 227 finally came to a complete stop. Amelia Rhodes, still seated in 15F, exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding for hours. The plane had landed safely, guided through turbulence, minor technical anomalies, and incapacitated crew members by her calm authority and expert knowledge. The cabin, which had once been filled with anxious murmurs and panicked whispers, was now quiet in awe and relief. Every passenger, from wide-eyed children to seasoned business travelers, recognized the extraordinary events they had just survived and the person at the heart of it all. Flight attendants moved carefully through the aisles, assisting passengers with seatbelts and oxygen masks. Lavra, the lead attendant, stopped beside Amelia and offered a look filled with admiration and gratitude. "I don't know how you did it," she whispered, voice choked with emotion. "You saved all our lives." Amelia shook her head slightly, still catching her breath, letting the acknowledgement settle, but focusing her mind on the next steps. "We did it together," she replied. Her tone carried a quiet authority that seemed to reassure everyone around her, calm, composed, unshakable. Outside, the two F-22 Raptors hovered momentarily before peeling off, returning to their base. Falcon 1 and Ghost, two exchanged glances, nodding silently in recognition of the incredible coordination they had just witnessed. Over the comms, Falcon 1 spoke, his voice steady but tinged with awe. "Echo, the airliner is safely on the ground. Your precision, calm, and leadership were exceptional. You should know, without your guidance, this could have ended very differently." Amelia listened quietly, a small warmth spreading through her chest. She had never sought recognition, yet the acknowledgement of the pilots underscored the gravity of her actions. Inside the cabin, passengers began to stand cautiously, their faces a mixture of disbelief, relief, and admiration. Many made their way toward Amelia, offering handshakes, tears, and words of gratitude. "You were amazing," one elderly man said, voice trembling. "I thought we were going to." He stopped, unable to complete the sentence, his eyes filled with unspoken thanks. A young mother whispered, "Thank you for keeping my children calm. You were our lifeline." Amelia offered small nods, careful to remain composed, though internally she felt the emotional weight of the ordeal beginning to settle. News crews and emergency personnel were already beginning to converge on the airstrip. The story of Flight 227, its incapacitated pilots, and the civilian passenger who had taken command spread quickly. Amelia, still known by her call sign Echo, became the focus of both awe and curiosity. Reporters peppered the airstrip with questions. "Who are you? How did you manage to guide an entire plane safely?" But Amelia remained humble, answering briefly and calmly. She emphasized teamwork, preparedness, and the skill of the crew and the pilots above. The narrative of heroism was hers, but she shared it with everyone involved. At NORAD, Falcon 1 and Ghost 2 were debriefed alongside controllers and air traffic operators. Echo's voice had guided every critical maneuver, relaying oxygen levels, cabin pressure, and mechanical readings while coordinating with attendants and passengers. Her quick thinking had allowed the pilots to focus on external guidance, navigating turbulence and visual approach to the runway with confidence. "She's remarkable," one officer said. "We've trained for these scenarios, but nothing prepares you for a civilian operating at this level under stress. She's exceptional." The word exceptional barely captured the magnitude of what had been accomplished. In the days following the landing, the story of Echo, the woman in 15F, went viral. Social media, news outlets, and aviation communities shared every detail. The incapacitated cockpit, the calm, commanding voice of the passenger, the coordination with F-22 pilots, and the successful emergency landing. Amelia remained quiet though, not seeking fame. She gave interviews sparingly, emphasizing the importance of preparation, clear communication, and staying calm under pressure. Yet the narrative grew larger than her humility could contain. Echo became a symbol, a testament to human courage, intellect, and the extraordinary potential of ordinary people in crisis. Among the passengers, Amelia's actions became a touchstone for gratitude and reflection. Survivors spoke of her calm voice, her precise instructions, and the way she had held the cabin together during what felt like an eternity. Children, once terrified of the strange, loud, shaking aircraft, remembered her gentle reassurance, the words she spoke to keep them calm. Adults reflected on the extraordinary clarity she maintained, the ability to anticipate problems, and the coordination that saved hundreds of lives. In every conversation, her codename, Echo, was repeated with reverence, admiration, and awe. Amelia herself returned to her life quietly, though she carried the indelible mark of that day. The experience had changed her, not in arrogance or fame, but in awareness of her own capacity for calm, leadership, and problem-solving under extreme stress. She continued her work in aerospace engineering, but Flight 227 remained a defining moment. She had become Echo in the truest sense, a voice of clarity, a bridge in chaos, and a symbol of how knowledge, courage, and composure could turn near disaster into survival. The pilots, Falcon 1 and Ghost 2, were recognized for their role as well, but both often credited Echo as the true linchpin. Without her, our guidance would have been limited. She had eyes, judgment, and authority inside that plane, Falcon 1 said at a press briefing. Echo was the reason Flight 227 is on the ground safely today, in military and civilian circles alike. Her calm, methodical, and courageous approach became a case study, analyzed for lessons in communication, emergency response, and human coordination in high-pressure environments. Months later, survivors of Flight 227 still spoke of Echo with reverence. Reunion gatherings were organized where passengers and crew thanked her in person. Each meeting, each conversation, reinforced the idea that a single voice, calm and knowledgeable, could change the outcome of a life-or-death scenario. Children drew pictures of planes with a figure labeled Echo in 15F. Mothers recounted her instructions to new generations, and pilots referenced her story in training simulations. Her legacy extended far beyond the cabin of Flight 227. It became a blueprint for heroism in modern aviation. Echo's story also inspired wider recognition in professional circles. Aviation engineers, emergency coordinators, and even military personnel studied the Flight 227 incident, analyzing how a single civilian could effectively manage a high-stakes situation when calm, trained, and decisive. Her ability to relay precise technical information, guide human behavior, and coordinate with pilots above became a model for training programs. It wasn't just a story of luck or courage. It was a demonstration of skill, intellect, and human potential under extraordinary circumstances. And yet, for all the accolades and attention, Amelia Rhodes remained modest. She never sought fame or accolades, though the world had no choice but to celebrate her. She continued to speak about preparation, calm decision-making, and teamwork, emphasizing that anyone with the right knowledge and mindset could make a difference. But the Cody name Echo, now etched into aviation history, remained her symbol, a reminder that clarity in crisis, courage under pressure, and steady leadership could literally save lives. The story of Flight 227 eventually became part of emergency response training, an example cited in aviation textbooks, documentaries, and seminars. Echo's voice, once an ordinary passenger's calm guidance, now served as a model of heroism and human ingenuity. Children learned about her in classrooms, pilots studied her coordination methods, and ordinary people were reminded of the extraordinary potential within themselves. She had taken a routine flight, transformed by crisis, and turned it into a lesson for generations. Even years later, when the airstrip where Flight 227 landed hosted new arrivals, crew members and passengers often glanced skyward, remembering the Raptor escorts, the turbulence, and the calm voice that had guided them to safety. Amelia Rhodes, the woman who had simply been in 15F, had become Echo, a symbol of courage, expertise, and humanity at its finest. Her legacy endured not just in headlines or textbooks, but in the hearts of those whose lives she had touched, forever echoing above the clouds. Flight 227 had been ordinary until chaos struck, but through preparation, skill, and a calm mind, the extraordinary emerged. A civilian became a hero, a Cody name became a lifeline, and a voice in the sky became a legend. Echo had shown the world that in moments of peril, one person's courage and clarity could ripple through the lives of many, changing fate itself.